Okay, test.
Right, okay. That should be working now. Testing the audio.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Testing the audio. Yep, working fine.
Yeah, that's good. I think we can get started because I also see a lot of people coming in. But welcome everyone. Happy Friday. Before we get started, I just want to first thank Josh for taking the time out of your very valuable days of the week and just entertaining us with a lot of these questions, not just coming from a lot of the people out here on TikTok, but also some of them coming from me. And tonight, the live is more focused about Filipinos who are applying for the Spain digital nomad visa or probably already got approved, thinking about it, or already in the process of moving. Because honestly, one of the biggest stress points that I get, especially on these lives, is taxes. And not because people are lazy to like research and stuff, but they don't know where to look, of course. And the
Hmm.
language barrier, of course, is just there. And there's a lot of terms that maybe they're not familiar with.
Yes,
And
indeed.
now we're trying to clear this up, just to make sure they get a very solid advice. And hopefully everyone is excited. And we'll wait for maybe a few more minutes before we formally start. But I just genuinely want to bring someone na legit in this conversation because I do not want to talk about something na hindi ako sure or something na I'm not an expert about. So when people ask me about taxes, and I do tell Josh this because I do ask him sometimes in the middle of the night of questions that are directed in the group or maybe coming in on my personal accounts. I want to make sure I get it right. And it's always not as straightforward because every person's finances is not the same for every single one of you. So, again, I'm gonna introduce Josh, which is a gestor here in Spain and is more of an expert in autonomous and digital nomads, employees in general here in Spain, and has been in the industry for a big amount of years, So he knows the works around and a lot of very good, clear advice. And I'm seeing a lot of already people on here. Hi everyone. And first, I want to open this with maybe a question that I get a lot is that why do we need to talk about the taxes in context of the Spain digital nomad visa?
That is a great question, Alex. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here today on the live. Apart from going straight into the first answer, but thank you very much for having me here today. It's a pleasure, and also as well helping the community understand what their true apart from legal side and immigration side, which you're covering on a day to day and processing their visas, but also as well to understand the tax implications and the fiscal side that is needed. Um, in regards to what you mentioned, it's very important that not only just from the immigration side that you get all your processes set up properly with the actual paperwork, it's also as well that you understand that once you become a tax resident in Spain or you live in here for longer than 6 months, that you're going to have some types of legal or fiscal obligations. Okay, so therefore, what I always mention to Alex at the time while you're setting up the process, or even sometimes afterwards, reach out to me straight away because this is a very important step to living here in Spain full time.
Yeah, exactly. So we just want to make sure that people know that the approval process or the visa process is not the end of
Correct.
making sure that you're compliant and keeping your residency here in Spain. And other than that, which is something a lot of people are excited to hear about, and I do
Hmm.
answer a lot of these questions, is that for someone, once you get approved, right, what are the main obligations that they need to look out for, or something that they need to understand, even just now
Hmm.
that they're still in the process of understanding the digital nomad visa?
Okay, so well, diving in directly with that, probably 99% of all Filipinos come through the regime of having to register as a freelancer. Okay, so the moment that you register as a freelancer here in Spain, or also known as autónomo, okay, is that the first thing that you need to know is that it's ideal to sync up this process in while you're finishing the immigration step, and also as well at the same time having already a point of contact, knowing what is the next steps as soon as it gets approved by the UGE, the DNV visa. Um, the reason being, and Alex will probably touch based on this now, is the requirements of registering as soon as possible, okay, to avoid any types of problems, any types of long-term problems, as right now the UGE are constantly changing their rules around these digital nomads. Okay, therefore they're being more strict. They've created new departments that they are checking up and following. Okay, and therefore it's very important that the registration process is done in the most little time possible to the DNB. Okay, and then also as well, at the same time, you can start setting up the documentation you need in order to get registered.
Yeah. That's definitely something that has been a point of tension in a lot of
Mhm.
like Facebook
Yeah.
groups as well. Because there are conflicting advices about it. Because some might not have this problem exactly, but what we urge is because UHE, this came directly from the UHE director, right? Last
Mhm. Yeah.
February, there was a conference and it came directly from them that there's no like time limit that they're giving us exactly, but they
Mhm.
just keep reiterating that it has to be immediately. So I would assume it would be a few days. But
Yeah.
what does it really mean to register? Like, what are the obligations or stuff that autonomous pay here in Spain?
Right, okay. So from the first moment that, apart from completing the registration process, also as well, there's a series of questions which always your gestor is going to ask you, in particular to the registration, okay? Because previously to doing the registration, you have to have some type of fiscal assessment, okay? So basically with this, I need to understand exactly what is your situation as of when you are moving to Spain, okay? Also as well, one of the most important points as well is knowing what type of activity you're doing. Okay, so you're fixed in both with the tax office and the social security, and you have your correct designated activity. Okay, the reason this is so important, okay, and I always explain this to my clients, is that this designating the correct activity is going to have some type of future impact when you are trying to include any types of expenses. Okay, because if you designate, let's just say, um, a consultancy fee, but realistically you have some type of other type of um, service, let's just say, and they try to contrast, okay, is this expense actually subject to what you're doing your activity wise as a consultant? Is this relevant to the sector to what you're doing? Okay, so it's very important to understand in the previous assessment of what is your activity, what are your types of expenses, and make sure that everything is um, understood correctly from the first moment. Okay. Apart from that, as well, what is very important is in the moment of the registration, a very common mistake that I see is when people try to attempt to do it themselves and they probably approach me maybe 2, 3 months later, or I've even seen cases of 12 months down the line
Yeah.
where they haven't marked the box of the tarifa plana. Okay, the tarifa plana is so important for all new autónomos here in Spain. Okay, just so I can give a brief context of what the tarifa plana is. Okay, it's the discounted rate that all new autónomos get for the first year. Okay, and this is a fixed rate. Okay, it's not calculated based on any type of income. Okay, and currently it's 88 euros 56 cents per month. Okay, so this particular discount is so important because if you do not mark it from the first moment, you start paying your contributions based on your net income from the first moment, and it costs you a lot of extra money, which could have been
Yeah,
saved, let's
which
just
could have
say.
been, yeah, which could have been completely avoidable. But yeah, I totally understand too that a lot of people are kind of have the misconception that the taxes and social security are going to be so high, especially in the first year. So that's something I like telling people that they kind of ease you into it. Like, not
Hmm.
just for
Yeah.
you, like because you're an immigrant, but because this is how it is done here in Spain. Even like people that are not immigrants, they ease you into paying like social security and stuff like that. So the other important thing in regards to paying is that technically when you get approved, right? And then
Yeah.
they reach out to you, how fast can you get them registered? And
Okay.
what does that mean? Like when do they pay basically
Okay.
what they owe?
Right. Okay. So the timeline, okay, and realistically, from my perspective, it's normally possible, like within reaching out point, probably like 48 to 72 hours. Okay. And this really depends exactly if you have all the documentation ready to go. Okay. So there is going to be, um, I always explain it that there is four essential items that are needed in order to register as an autónomo. Okay. In which previously, normally, any clients that work through Alex will automatically already complete two. Okay, so one of them is having the approval of the DNV, so you can already have that authorization to work. Okay, the second one is that you have a Spanish address. Okay, with this Spanish address, I have this question quite a lot, and basically what they ask me, right? Okay, Josh, at the moment, I'm currently living in an Airbnb in the meanwhile, but I don't have a definitive address. This is a very big common situation with people who've just moved here and can't get a long-term
Yeah.
rental yet. Okay, so what is still important? We designate that as a provisional address. Okay, in the meanwhile, also what is important and what I always do, I designate myself as a representative, well, let's just say as a tax representative in the meanwhile. Okay, so that you don't have to have that Airbnb address as a fixed address. Okay, and then also as well, when the activity is registered, you would put that you work within a certain district, okay, of the location of where you're currently living in the meanwhile. And then once you do have a long-term rental, then we make the changeover into a definitive address. Okay. The two most important items that are needed for the registration, and one of them is going to be what is called the digital certificate. Okay. This sometimes is difficult to get, okay, because with the DNB process, you don't get the NIE number granted until you get the DNB approval. Okay, so the turnover time from when you get that granted to getting the appointment with with either the tax office or a local authority and generating the code, sometimes you can have a couple of days wait because of the appointments. Okay. The other alternative is there's other ways to obtain it. Okay. So, for example, you can obtain them online. They do normally tend to have costs associated to it,
Yeah.
but it is, let's just say, you skip the line of having to go to an appointment.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
And for last but not least, okay, is to open a Spanish bank account. Okay. With many Spanish banks, it's going to be very difficult. Okay. In my experience, um, some banks tend to be more flexible than others. Okay. By general guidelines, I would always tend to recommend clients to go to, for example, Santander. Okay, this is no promotion to Santander directly, but the reason being is that within Santander, I have had lots of clients that have been able to open bank accounts in the meanwhile with their passport. Okay, with the understanding that they're in the process of getting their DNV approval granted, and with the condition that as soon as they are registered as an autonomo, they get a provisional IBAN number, and therefore straight away that you would send the documents directly to the person at the bank. Okay,
Yeah.
and therefore the bank account is active from that moment. With other banks, I have a bit of everything. Some say yes, some say no. Even some banks say that you can only open the bank account with a TIE card, which,
Yeah.
from my perspective, is a bit of a pain in the arse. But
It's
realistically,
absurd.
yeah, realistically, that is within my experience. Santander are quite flexible with that first procedure. Okay. And then also as well, once you've been registered and you do have your TIE card in the car in the future, you can always move into other banks, online banks, for example, like Open Bank or N26, which offers probably better conditions of banking. But for the initial procedure, getting a mainstream bank set up is the only way forward. Okay.
Yeah.
So from with those four essential items, if everything is in place, the turnover from when you reach out to me directly to explaining everything and having the first assessment call, if everything's ready to go, it can be done even the same day. Um, if not, if we do have to get some types of documentation ready, either get an appointment at a bank or the tax office to get the certificate, or getting the certificate online, it can make it last a bit longer. But generically, 48, 72 hours is probably the normal standard guideline.
Yeah, and definitely this does not mean that the moment you register, you pay something with regards to taxes and
Correct.
social security. Yeah, so you are
Correct.
still gonna be kind of like following the timeline, that is set,
Hmm.
the calendar
Yeah,
basically of when you pay taxes and when you pay social security. And with
correct.
that said, can you tell us a bit more about how the timelines go? When do we pay social security usually?
Hmm.
When do we pay like quarterly and annual tax obligations, that
Okay.
type of stuff?
Yes, so the Social Security, okay, depends on the date of registration, okay? All registrations done from the 1st and the 15th of the month, okay? Your first Social Security payment will come out on the last working day of that month, okay? The reason I explain this, last working day, very important. Sometimes we get the last day of the month that it lands on a weekend, and they will always charge that previous Friday. Okay, so it's very important. Sorry?
Oh, sorry. It's my phone. Yeah.
Um, it's very important that you always have some type of funds in the bank account at all times. Okay, I always recommend clients that if your Spanish bank account isn't your full operating account and you use other bank accounts on your day to day, always try to pay, let's just say, times three amounts of the Social Security. Just have some security in there so that if anything goes wrong, that you can able to pay the Social Security on time. Okay. And if your registration is after the 15th of the month, okay, the way they do it is that they will collect the amount that you've generated from that day onwards, okay, and they will charge it in the following month, okay, with alongside the current month. Okay, so and also as well, one important point that I haven't mentioned that from the date of registration, you start paying from that moment onwards. So if you register, let's just say on the 15th of the month, okay, which is halfway through, and the total amount of Social Security is 88 euros, okay, you will only pay for half of month from the date of registration onwards. Okay,
Oh, okay.
so
Does
it's
that
not the
work
full
with
month.
taxes as well?
No, that doesn't work with taxes like that either. Okay. So, in regards to taxes, okay, and this is going to be probably more in depth, okay, as depending in which time of the year you actually register as autonomo, okay, and also as well depending on when you move to Spain. Okay, so
Yeah.
prior prior to me actually explaining how you pay taxes as an autonomo, okay, and how you pay them quarterly and then annually, okay, I'm going to explain one very important point, okay, which goes down to what is called tax residency. Okay. The reason I mention this because depending on your tax residency, either if you're considered a resident or a non-resident in Spain, you're going to be taxed during the year quarterly the same, but when you file your annual income tax return or your non-residence tax return, you're going to be taxed differently. Okay. How do you determine your tax residency? Okay. The important thing that if you're traveling on your own, and especially during the first year, the transition stage, okay, the first criteria that is taken into consideration is what is called the 183-day rule, okay,
Yeah.
which is equivalent to 6 months, okay, where you live in the world for longer than 6 months, that's where you will be considered tax resident, okay. Therefore, what does this implicate? Okay, when you live in Spain for longer than 6 months of the year, that means you'll be considered tax resident of Spain for your worldwide income, okay, independently of where the money is paid from, okay? And this includes the whole period of the year that you move, okay? So, for example, if you move now in April of 2026 to Spain and you spend the remaining of the year in Spain, up until the rest of the year. That means you're going to be tax resident in Spain. Okay. What is
Yeah.
important here is that you're going to be taxed for the whole year. Okay. And how does this work? And this is not to scare you. Okay. There is the international tax treaties to treat these specific scenarios where you have been registered in other countries or you've paid taxes in another country. So therefore, you're not taxed for the same concept twice. Okay.
Yeah.
So the collects what it collects in this period, it collects from income from January up until December. Okay. And from the moment that you register as an autónomo and you can start invoicing in Spain, okay, you're going to start paying for your economic activity as an autónomo from that moment onwards. Okay. In regards to any income that is generated beforehand, okay, so for example, we have January up until March, okay, you have been you haven't been in Spain, you've been working outside of Spain, okay, and you've already presented this elsewhere, okay. This income is reported within your annual income tax return, okay, but it's included in a complete different breakdown to what your Spanish activity is as an autónomo, okay,
Yeah.
and it's all collected once a year on your annual income tax return, okay. What is important also, okay, in regards to if this was the same scenario, okay, that you've worked from January up until like July, August time outside of Spain, okay, and you move to Spain August, September time, okay, in Spain, that means you would have spent less than 6 months in Spain, okay, so therefore you are considered a non-resident, okay. What is important to know here, okay, and this is where we always have the conflict, okay, in between what are requirements for the visa and what are the fiscal requirements from the tax office, okay. And from the visa perspective, the tax office requests you to register as autónomo straight away, okay, and start meeting the minimum economic requirements, okay. Meanwhile, from the fiscal perspective, okay, you're considered a non-resident. Okay, so all income that is generated from January up until the remaining moment of the year where you register, okay, is presented wherever you're considered tax resident. But from the moment you start invoicing in Spain, okay, you have to pay taxes in Spain for that period only. Okay, so to set an example on this, you register in September, okay, to meet the economic requirements, you start invoicing €3,000 a month, for example, okay, and you're going to be taxed based on those €3,000 after deductions, which will move into that particular calculation later on, okay, you're going to be taxed only and exclusively on that amount for that period, okay, as a non-resident. Okay, and how does this work? So you pay prepayments per quarter, okay, a fixed rate of 20%, okay, and you file instead of an annual income tax return as a resident, you will file a non-resident return, okay, which is collected in the Model 200. Okay, this tax return, you will have to pay taxes in Spain, okay? But as I mentioned earlier, we have double taxation treaties, okay? So in the same way that in Spain, we would include the income, the foreign income from abroad and apply tax credits from abroad, okay? We will do the vice versa, okay? So for example, you're a tax resident in the Philippines and in Spain, you have paid from September to December taxes in Spain, you will need to report that income on your income tax return in the Philippines as foreign income, okay? But also as well, you report that income with the foreign tax credit of how much tax you have paid in Spain as well, okay? So you don't pay tax on the same concept twice,
Yeah.
okay? That is very important to know that within the treaties, and especially during the first year of transition to Spain, at some stage of the year, unless you do the perfect transition at the end of the year and you register in January, we are always going to have this problem during your first year of transition. At some moment, you're going to have to apply some type of foreign income or tax credit independently of whenever you move in the year.
Yeah, so it definitely is not a one medicine cure all thing. It varies for
Correct.
each person depending on when they
Exactly.
arrive. Do you have a specific recommendation on maybe when they should time their
Well,
application from a tax
yes.
residency side?
Well, from a tax perspective, if you're only interest or if you don't have any ties, let's just say, in the Philippines, okay, you can probably, from a tax perspective, it's not going to have much impact if you move in the first part of the year, okay? But this is case by case. And this could also be very common that people want to sell up their house or their property in the Philippines, okay, prior to moving to Spain. In this case, I would definitely recommend that you move in the second part of the year, okay? Why do I mention this? Okay, if you sell your property in the Philippines, okay, while becoming a tax resident in Spain, Spain has the possibility to tax that capital gain, okay, what is very important. So when if you move in the second part of the year, okay, that you as an individual will not be liable for anything of that first year. So therefore it's only subject and will only be dealt with in the Philippines, okay? But as you mentioned at the start of the live, each case is very specific to each individual. So that's why it's very important that you assess this not only just during the process of setting up the DNV visa, but also as well assess the tax side in sync so
With
that
it.
with it at the same time. So everything is synced in so that when you do have, let's just say, syncing in all the requirements for the visa, but also as well the tax perspectives.
Yeah, definitely. So that's something that came up here in the chat that I feel
Yeah.
would be very valuable since we're already in the topic is that they're
Hmm.
asking a little bit about what if they get approved on the first half of the year but don't
Hmm.
move to Spain until the second half of the year, which
Right.
we did talk about it in the beginning that you have to register like as you get approved, but there are some people that exit the Schengen area before they even get the approval. So what
Yeah.
would you advise from a tax perspective?
So, what is very important for you to know with this, okay, if you register within the first part of the year, Spain will automatically, just based on the presumption that you've been registered for longer than 6 months as an autónomo, will single-handedly consider you a tax resident, okay? What is important to know about this, okay? And this is where you need to do your own administration or create your own documentation and stock everything properly and correctly. Okay, so you can provide proof that you physically haven't been in Spain for longer than 6 months. Okay, so for example, what is important to document about this? Okay, and this is very common because many people will request the approval, let's just say around April time right now or May time, but effectively want to make the final move July, August time because they have to wrap up things either in the Philippines or anywhere else in the world. And they don't effectively move to Spain until the second part of the year. What is very important is try to keep some type of reconciliation of bank extracts, okay, or utility bills of properties of where you're living abroad, okay? Spain uses this type of consideration as proof. So, for example, from your bank extracts, what do they look at? That you've made physical card payments abroad. From the utilities perspective, that you've physically been living and see the consumptions of the properties that where you've been living abroad. Okay.
Yeah.
Also, as well, what do they look at is any types of flights that you are that when you actually essentially move to Spain as well. That was proof of flight of that final flight of when you're moving to Spain finally all this type of documentation that you would,
Needs to be
let's just
kept.
say, archived in the event that they was to inspect that or audit that, you can provide this as proof. So you're not shown as a tax resident. But on their first instance, they will consider you a tax resident.
Yeah, so it does get a little bit complicated when you
Yes,
kind of want to apply as early as you can, first half of the year, but don't want to actually live here and would be moving on the second half of the year. So it is a little bit
correct.
complicated, but it's not unheard of or undoable. Yeah.
Correct, yes. What is very important that you do have some type of previous assessment call to go through your specific case, and then based on that assessment, you can be told exactly what documentation is needed to provide all the proof um, of actually entering Spain. Because sometimes also as well, we have these the situation that, for example, I've had the case in the past and of clients that, for example, they have the Schengen visa. Okay, and they physically haven't been in Spain, but they have been traveling through Europe for a couple of months.
Yeah.
Okay, and then they finally finished their travel for a couple of months. Let's just say they've been to Germany, they've been to France, and then they actually come to Spain via land.
Yeah.
Okay, and this in this case itself, we don't have no flights, so
Yeah.
therefore it becomes
More
specific,
muddy.
very difficult to provide proof with. Okay, so what I mentioned and advised on that specific scenario is that you go through when you go through via land, is that you stop at customs and you go through the immigration area and get a statement that you've entered the country
Yeah.
that is
A
provided by
declaration
the
of entry.
authorities that exactly. Exactly, because this declaration of entry is going to determine a lot and is going to have a lot of strength behind it when providing that proof as a not a tax resident of Spain.
Yeah, that really makes a lot more sense. And just so we address this, because it's kind of close to what we were talking about tax credits and
Hmm.
tax residency in the Philippines specifically. So we
Hmm.
don't really like have that much of a difference with how our taxes are set up here in
Yep.
Spain. We do have quarterly filing and annual tax filing. So would you
Yep.
say that the quarterly or the annual, are they both accepted as tax credits proof or like documentation so that it
So
can be credited here in Spain?
the full proof of the documents that are needed, okay, is an actual copy of your annual return in the Philippines. Okay, either as a resident or a non-resident. In this event, the actual certificate of the taxes presented, okay, is the most important point. Okay, this is only requested to provide proof when let's just say a tax um, audit happens, okay?
Yeah.
But it's always important that you document it well and you have it on file and ready to go, okay? Because if the tax offices request it, okay, if it doesn't come in Spanish nationality, you have 10 days to respond to the audit. And if it doesn't come in the native nationality, it has to be translated to
Swan
Spanish.
translated. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Correct.
that makes a lot more sense to make also it a little bit easier for them to verify those records as well.
Yeah.
Now, I think I'm not the only one who thinks we need to like move to like the most asked questions about the digital nomad visa,
Okay.
which is basically the Beckham Law. We're
Okay.
talking about how a lot of Filipinos are going here on the autonomous route, which is basically freelancers, virtual assistants, sole
Mm-hmm.
proprietors, or a lot of them too are remote workers that are not employees necessarily, but more of like independent contractors. But a lot of them
Correct.
ask about the Beckham Law
Okay.
because in a lot of the groups, they still cannot answer it like straightforwardly on
Mm-hmm.
what is allowed for the Beckham Law, how do you apply
Okay.
for it, and stuff like that. So I definitely want to learn a little bit more about that. I think the people in the
Yes.
chat as
Yes,
well.
indeed. This is actually quite a frequent question when they reach out to me as well. So, what is the Beckham Law? Okay. Basically, the most important factor that you need to know about the Beckham Law that this is only applicable for people moving to Spain who have the consideration of an employee. Okay, this is not for people that apply for the DNV as an autónomo, as a freelancer, or as a contractor. Okay, so for example, within the Filipino community, I do have cases that you can request to the Beckham Law as an employee because they've either come to Spain on a different type of visa that is a DNB. Okay, so for example, we have the possibility that you've been contracted by a Spanish employer, for example, that you would have the possibility to request and go into the Beckham Law. Okay, also as well, another visa that it's probably requested in a very big percentage of them is highly qualified visas, okay, where you come to Spain, you're highly qualified, and your practice is as you're a professional, but you're treated as an employee of a company. Okay. There is one particular case, okay, where you can request to go onto the Beckham Law where it is compatible with the autonomous status. Okay. And this is through another type of visa, which is called the entrepreneur visa. Okay. What is very particular about this case? That within the entrepreneur visa, okay, you have to have some type of, let's just say, innovation or type of creation of startup type of business, okay, within this type of visa or field, okay. There is very specific requirements to be able to go onto this visa, okay, which will require you to actually create a business plan and get it filtered and approved by a system that is called ENISA. Okay. With this itself and this said, okay, this would probably fall into the case of probably the 1%. This is probably for all those types of people that are creating new types of investigations, creating new types of softwares, or creating some type of new startup company. Okay. But this is only very particular because that visa getting granted is based on being approved by this system called ENISA. Okay. So within my experience, the Beckham Law across the Filipino community, okay, and what is probably the most important situation that to apply to the Beckham Law on the DNV status, the main requirement is that you have to have a certificate of coverage, okay, as an employee. And what I was discussing earlier on today with Alex was that with the Filipinos, that getting that certificate of coverage is next to impossible from the Philippines. So
Yeah.
therefore, from the Philippines itself, getting that DNV visa as an employee is next to impossible. So therefore, the Beckham Law is automatically discarded for a very big percentage of the community. Okay,
Yeah.
this doesn't take out that you could have the Filipino nationality, but your employer is elsewhere. There is plenty other countries that, for example, you could be an employee of an American company or Canada or Australia
UK, I
or the
think.
UK.
Mhm.
Um, all these types of different countries where they do have these bilateral agreements with Spain, and you can obtain the certificate of coverage. That is where you can go into, let's just say, this box of getting the DNB as an employee. But if your employer is directly from the Philippines, it's very difficult to get that certificate of coverage.
Yeah. Not only that too, but just getting the certificate, even if it exists, for example, in a UK in America, does take a while and is a little bit of a problem. And that's why a lot of people just opt to switch from an employee to autonomo and apply
Yeah,
using the autonomo route, which,
yeah,
forgoes the Beckham law. But
hmm
the thing that I think is the natural progression of this conversation is
yeah,
that, then how do we file? Like, what do we file? What
hmm
is the percentage? I think that's
yeah.
something that people really wanted to know.
What is very important, what you mentioned earlier, that people, for the sake of accelerating the process at times, could potentially shoot themselves in their own foot. Okay. The reason why I say that, the Beckham Law itself can be very beneficial for those people who make a considerable amount of money. Okay. At least from the perspective on how Spain sees it. Okay. With the Beckham Law, you're taxed at a fixed rate. Okay. And that is a fixed rate of 24%. Okay. It starts to become beneficial for all incomes over the 60K mark. Okay. That's where it starts to become beneficial, because that is where the the progressive tax rate of the normal system starts to change over from the 23, 24 mark to the Beckham Law being fixed at 24%. Okay. In addition to that, why is the Beckham Law also very beneficial? From the moment that it's granted, okay, and during that duration that you are granted for that period, and you meet the same criteria and meet the same conditions, you have it for 5 years straight. Okay. And what is important to know about this is that you're only taxed on the income that is generated from within Spain. Okay. So therefore, it can be very beneficial, because if you have your salary job and it's being taxed at a fixed rate of 24, but if you have other sources of income, such as, for example, payout of dividends from other countries, you have payout of interests from other countries, or you buy and sell shares abroad from other countries, or you buy and sell houses, all these types of investment type of incomes that you can have outside of Spain are only taxed in the country where they're generated, and they're not actually taxed in Spain. So that is very beneficial for lots of people that do have other sources of income without, let's just say, Spain. Okay. Also, as well, within the Beckham Law, the way you're treated is you are a tax resident in Spain, okay, but you're taxed as a non-resident. Okay, so therefore your flat rate is 24%, and for any income that is generated within Spain, let's just say Spanish bank account interest, then it works on a progressive rate of 19%, 21, 23. The more you earn, the higher it goes up.
Yeah.
But that is only for Spanish generated income. Okay. Interesting part also within the regime is that it simplifies your tax situation. Therefore, it excludes you from having to present any type of foreign asset return, okay, that is called the Model 720. Okay, which normal tax residents in Spain would have the obligation if they have assets outside of Spain that are over 50,000 euros. Okay, it also excludes you from other types of obligations, such as wealth tax or high or what is called larger fortunes tax for the very wealthy and very rich. So
Yeah.
therefore, it can be very interesting regime for those people who are higher earners or hold high wealths
Yeah,
within Spain.
exactly. Because if you really think about it, especially considering the minimum income requirement for the DNV for one person, how much percentage is that? Do you think? Like it's about right now, I think 2,849 euros per month.
Hmm.
So if you really think about it, if you're gonna apply for Beckham Law, assuming that you are an employee, right? Because autonomous
Yeah,
are disqualified for Beckham Law.
yeah,
Then assuming you're an employee, you qualify for Beckham Law.
yeah.
If you compare the normal IRPF or the progressive tax compared to the
Hmm.
Beckham Law, which is flat 24%, then I think with the minimum income requirement, it would be like lower, right?
Lower, yes. It's not beneficial in that case. So it only starts to become beneficial from the 60K mark onwards.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
I actually seen a comment in the chat which someone mentioned 60K or 600K. Okay. And that is actually quite interesting for the person to mention that is because it starts to become beneficial from the 60K mark onwards. But there is also another reference within the Beckham Law, okay, which is the 600K mark. Okay. And this is when you have the next step of the Beckham Law. Okay. So anything generated in between 0 and 600K is taxed at a flat rate of 24%. Okay. And then any income that is exceeding the rate of 600K onwards, okay, is then taxed at a fixed rate of 47%.
Which is a big jump.
It's a big jump, but when you compare it to the normal taxation regime,
Oh, the progressive
okay,
tax rate, yeah.
the progressive rate that starts at like 300K. So you're getting in excess of 300,000 euros taxed at a lower rate of 24. So in all overall status, it does work out still very beneficial.
Yeah, but definitely something that I just want to like put here out there is that for people that are asking, and I know there are people in the future that will still continue asking, for autonomous or independent contractors, freelancers, virtual assistants that are
Hmm.
applying as
Yeah,
autonomous here in Spain, we do not qualify for the Beckham law. So it's not
correct.
even
Yes, that is
something you can
correct.
try. It's not a pass fail test. It's just something that
Exactly.
we
Yeah.
don't qualify for.
The only people that have that option is the entrepreneur option, and that is very specific to getting that granted by ENISA. Okay. And 9 times out of 10 with ENISA, okay, the idea behind that type of visa is that you're going to have some type of impact in Spain. So therefore, your product is aimed at the Spanish market. Okay,
Yeah.
you don't go into the 80-20 rule. It's aimed at the Spanish market. So this is for people that have completely different type of structure to the digital nomad.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a different type of visa. Like
Yes,
the
correct.
highly qualified visa or probably just being a straight up like working visa here in Spain.
Yes, very much correct. So,
Yeah, but I want to also now expound on the progressive tax rate because people find it
okay.
scary. They're like always assuming, oh, I'm going to pay 47% because they see the 19 to 47% and they always assume the worst that they pay
Hmm.
47%. And
Yeah.
there are a lot of also maybe people online that don't completely understand their tax returns and why it's taxed that way. So I want a little bit more light into that. So for
Okay. Yeah.
autonomous, can you explain how the tax rate works?
Okay. So for autonomous, and in this case, this is applicable not only just for autonomous, but also as well for everyone in the call that is a tax resident in Spain. Okay. So within the normal IRPF system, okay, the way it works is that you're taxed based off the excess of what is a threshold. Okay. Your threshold, your fixed threshold, um, in Spain is going to be 5,500 as of standard. Okay. And this threshold then also increases depending on your specific situation. Okay, this depends also as well. This threshold increases gradually, depending if it's just yourself, okay, or if you're actually in Spain with any type of dependents that do not work, okay, such as your partner, okay, or also as well if you have children, okay. This is important to know, okay. In regards to everything that is taxed above the threshold from that moment onwards, okay, all tax advisors, we have to advise that it starts at like 19%, okay, and then progressively goes up, and everyone mentions 47%, okay. This is like a generic rule, okay, and the reason why I mention that is that we have to say that because depending to which part of Spain that you move to, you're going to have to pay different types of taxes. Okay, because in Spain, you don't just pay taxes to one general, let's just say, tax office. Okay, it's all paid to the same person, but then it's distributed. Okay, so for anyone who, for example, has previously lived in the US, it works based on the same system as what they have
Yeah, like
there.
a
You pay
federal and state.
and a province and a state tax. That is correct. So you pay one percentage to the main government, and then you pay another amount to the main state of the government. So therefore, depending on the state fixed rates, okay, these are fixed and the same for everyone, but what you pay to the physical communities, this varies. Okay, for example, in Spain, some of the most interesting areas and lower tax rates is, for example, Madrid and Andalusia. Okay, within the ones that are not so interesting, and also as well, Alex and myself are both there at the moment, is, for example, the Valencian region and Catalonia. Okay, this type of research can always be beneficial for everyone to look at prior to moving to Spain, because also it has an impact on the taxes. Okay, this starts to have larger impacts when you are starting to earn higher incomes also as well. The general rule is anyone that is earning like up to the 45K mark across Spain and all the communities are more or less very similar. And the points maybe be 1% up, 1% down. Okay. Then where we do get the biggest changes, for example, is like at the maximum rates, which we mentioned earlier with the 47%. Madrid, for example, is capped at 47%. The Valencian region, for example, is capped at 54%, which is more than your half of your income. So therefore, for higher earners, that could be a very big percentage difference there. So therefore, it can be interesting to assess that point. But the general rule of what we have to give as advisors, because we can't specifically mention how much you're going to pay, is because of where you're going to move to and depending exactly on how much you earn.
Yeah, exactly. Not just that too, but don't forget that it's not as straightforward tax filing is. There are things that we will talk about a little bit later, but
Hmm.
there are other factors besides where you live, but also how many you are in the family, and of
Yes,
course, the
correct.
part where tax deductions come in.
Correct, yes. Especially tax deductions. That's a very important thing to highlight. For example, like off the top of my head, I know the ones here in the Valencian region, which are very interesting. For example, for incomes up to like 60,000 euros, you can include, for example, if you need to buy new lenses for your glasses, you can deduct up to 30% in the autonomic deductions. Also, as well, for example, if you go to the gym or you need to have physiotherapy, up to people that make up to 60,000 euros, they can deduct partial of their payments directly off their tax bill. So, depending on which part of Spain you move, and this is regulated directly by the community that you live in, and the requirements are specific to that state. Okay, you do have a series of deductions. For example, what I mentioned also on a call earlier to Alex was about, can I include my kids' schooling fees? And that is probably the most common one across all
Yeah.
of the states in Spain. It's available nearly in with across all of the states, okay? But the requirements and the deductions applied completely different, okay? In some states, for example, it's only specific to like let's just say schooling material, like the purchase of the books for the kids, and purchases of that type of stuff. For example, in other communities, it's applicable only to private schooling.
Yeah.
Okay. It's applied across different areas depending on the state that you're in, and also as well, it's regulated on how much money you earn also. Okay. So depending to the community that you live in, you would have to go to in fact, this days now it's quite as easy of just going onto Google and finding, okay, what are the autonomic deductions for 2025 for this state of the Valencian region, for example, and it will create you a list and you can actually click on to the tax office website alone and it's already translated into English.
Yeah. So
Um,
definitely it's something that, because a lot of my clients, when it comes to immigration residency and stuff like that, they
mhm,
consult with me with where do they want to live. So I always put this as one of the things that could influence it, because I cannot choose where you want to live. There's not a best place to live. It varies from person to person, the preferences, the budget, and of
yeah,
course, what you want to make out of coming here in Spain. So
mhm,
definitely this is one of the points that are very important when choosing where to live, because it definitely will change your savings and your budget. Like if
yeah,
you're gonna live in Madrid and you feel like you can get back in deductions, in grants,
correct.
whatever it is that is you're gonna pay for rent wise, then I think it's
Hmm.
definitely worth it.
Yeah,
Especially if that's the city or the vibe that you're looking for.
yeah.
Other than
Specifically as
that,
well, it's sometimes in some communities, if you can save money on tax, it means that you can cover a higher rent or compensate it with a higher
exactly.
rent, for example. So you don't necessarily have to look at everything.
Exactly. But other than that, I feel like a lot of people, especially in the comments right now, are like asking about their families and like, okay,
Yeah.
this is how much I'm earning, how much would I pay in taxes? And like we've discussed, it's not as straightforward as that.
Hmm.
But maybe Josh can give a little bit of insight on explaining the timeline for social security and taxes and the percentage of that as your income goes
Hmm.
higher. Like
Yeah.
maybe we can go for like basing it on the minimum income requirement as well.
Yes. Let me just open the table a second of the tax office.
No worries at all. I hope you guys leave your questions as well in the chat, because that would be definitely helpful as we answer them later.
Hmm.
Is the four is the 54% in Valencia? Yeah, in the whole Valencian
Yes.
community actually. So it's not just in Valencia. What provinces do you recommend? Well, it varies, but what Josh discussed earlier is that it's very good tax wise to live in the Madrid region and the Andalusia region.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and we
Right.
can go
Okay.
back to you, Josh. Yeah.
I have the tables here, okay, and the way this works on a progressive rate, okay, is that it's this is the tax percentages, okay, based on only the amounts that exceed the base, okay. So starting off with like the any income that is exceeding 12,450, okay, is taxed at a 19% rate,
Is this
okay.
for annual, right?
This is an average that is calculated without through all of the community. Okay, so they've just basically included all the tax percentages of all the communities and just done an average.
And this is for the yearly income.
This is for the yearly income.
So this
Yes,
puts
correct.
in about 1,037 per month, for example,
Correct.
for this one.
Yes.
So that's 19%. So
19%.
definitely not in the DNV like requirement.
Correct. Correct.
So we can start maybe at around the 2,849 mark. So I think
Okay.
that should be around the 34,000 mark.
Yes. So within that region, okay, any excess of within that range is around 30%. Okay. And then the next jump is from 35 to 60,000, which averagely goes into like what is 37%. Okay. With these percentages, okay, it's not exactly those percentages. Okay. The reason
Yeah.
why I mention this is because the the way the formula that is calculated within the tax office system, okay, doesn't actually take into consideration all of your personal situation. Okay, so from the amounts that you're paying tax wise, okay, it eventually lowers with all the thresholds and discounts that you can get throughout on the let's just say the system. Okay, so for example, the way I always explain it to my clients, and I always prefer to go based off more or less amounts because I know them more or less off my head now from any range of like in between like the 30K region all the way up to the 60K region is because I've done that many tax returns within that region. I more or less know exactly how much you're going to pay. Because I don't like to mention in regards to what the percentages really are because it scares people. Because
Yeah.
those percentages realistically aren't the final ones.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
So for example, for incomes like in between the range of let's just say 30K, okay, which their final um net profit is after taxes, your taxes are going to be around approximately 5,500 euros per year. Okay. Moving up into the region of like 36 to 40K, okay, which is probably going to be a very large section of our viewers today, which are the minimum person who is traveling on their own. Okay, there you're looking approximately in between 7,500 up to 8,500,
Yeah,
depending
and
on the
this is not
range.
even including people that, because if you think about it, a lot of the DNV workers pay for a lot of tools that they can
Correct.
deduct. So
Yes.
definitely that's not including that. But this gives a realistic expectation of what
Mm-hmm.
the taxes would be. And don't forget that you don't pay this all in one go. You pay
Mm-hmm.
this every quarter. So in a
Yes,
sense,
throughout the
it's
year.
cut up into four. But other than that, another question that come up here is that if you register for taxes
Yes.
halfway through the month, how does that work? Do they pay the whole month or only half of the month?
Okay, so in theory, what the law states that you should only start invoicing from the moment that you register. Okay. Therefore, what does this mean? Okay, is that up to the date of your registration, in theory, you should be registered elsewhere. Okay, so therefore, you should start to invoice from that moment onwards. Okay, and this also is well depends on the situation that I mentioned at the start, which is are you a resident or are you a non-resident? Okay, and this is where things start to become a bit flexible. Okay, is that if you register in, let's just say, the 15th of April, okay, but you've worked the whole month and you invoiced the whole month, it doesn't make no difference.
Yeah.
Okay, because you're a tax resident in Spain, you're paying taxes from January to December anyway. Okay, so there's not going to be a problem or an inconvenience from that perspective. Okay, because you're generically paying taxes for the full year.
Yeah,
But for
exactly.
example, if you are a non-resident, it's in your interest to only invoice from the 15th of the month onwards, which is for that specific period from whenever you're registered.
Exactly. So that also, just for clarification, right? Because that means basically what you're saying is that it doesn't matter if they invoice like the full of April or even
Hmm.
half of April, because in the end, for the annual income tax filing, everything gets computed. So they either pay it as
Correct. Yes.
early as that quarter or they just pay it off in the annual, which I know
Exactly.
that you
Yeah.
always advise
Yes.
this
What I
thing with
always,
your
yes.
clients.
Correct. What I particularly mention, in fact, this case in particular I had very recently as well, is from my perspective, I think it's better to actually include the full month, as then you can prepay more tax for that quarter, so then you don't have to pay so much on an annual basis. Okay. And talking about the prepayment tax, I'm going to explain exactly how the quarterly taxes work. Okay. And also as well how they are calculated. Okay. And also as well the procedure behind um, of everything in regards to how you need to manage um, all of your income invoices, all of your expenditure invoices, and what is needed to actually get to those figures. Okay, so as an autonomo, you're a registered business. So therefore, all of your, let's just say, accounts or how your income is calculated is all based off documents. Okay. These documents are called invoices. Okay. These invoices, the way it works, and in the grand majority of people, they will previously already understand this because they've either been a contractor prior to coming to Spain, but I'm going to explain it as if you don't know nothing. Okay. Is that in order to get paid, you need to create an income invoice. Okay, this income invoice is presented to your client. Okay, there is some main requirements that need remain requirements of information that is needed on these invoices. Okay, and it must contain your full name, your NIE, and your full registered address here in Spain. Okay, and also as well must contain your client's details on who you are invoicing. Okay, what's important also within the invoice is that it contains the concept of the services that you're providing to that client. Okay. And then also as well, the amount that you are invoicing them for. Okay. A question that I get a lot is especially from either the Philippines or US clients or people invoicing in other currencies. Okay, is do I have to put the invoice in euros? Okay. My main recommendation is that you should invoice always in euros if possible. Okay. Because it avoids making any future changes if it was to get to audit. Okay. If it's not possible or your client isn't comfortable with that, okay, is that you raise the invoice in the currency exchange rate of what it is, okay, and below you put some type of, let's just say, note, okay, of how much the amount is in euros, okay. By standard practice, if this invoice doesn't have that exchange rate on in euros because you haven't used, let's just say, a commercial rate, okay, by standard practice, we will be using the Central Bank of Spain's exchange rate on the official rates. Okay. What is very important also to include in the invoice, which is a common mistake within digital nomads, and this should always be part of your template, okay, is that we have a little description within the invoice where it mentions the specific article that your invoice is subject to reverse VAT charge. Okay, the Spanish tax office, from this perspective, can be quite picky with this. And 9 times out of 10, clients forget to put this on or put it on the first invoice and then forget to put it on afterwards. And we always have to change them at a later date before
Yeah.
presenting them. But this specific clause itself mentions that you are providing services outside of Spain. So therefore, the VAT rate is 0%.
Yeah, and that definitely would be easier to in case any audit happens because it's kind of like already explained on there.
Correct. Correct. As from we've covered the income side, now we get to let's just say I like to call it the interesting side, um, which is deductible expenses. Okay. As you're a business, okay, what the law specifically states is that you can deduct any type of expense that is related directly to your activity, okay, or impacts your activity, okay. So within the deductible expenses, this is always going to be a grey area and based on what the tax inspector that you get thinks or doesn't think is deductible. Okay, but prior to that, this is why it's very important to always contract a gestor or an accountant, because that person is always going to previously filter out based on experience and based on what we already see, what works and what doesn't work, or if there's any legal basis behind the
Mm-hmm.
deductibility of that specific expense. Okay, so I'm going to name some general expenses that are generally always accepted by within the tax office. Okay, and then I'm going to open, let's just say, the Pandora box of some of those expenses could always be on the limbo. Are they deductible? Are they not deductible? Okay. And if they are,
Yeah.
how do we provide that proof? Okay. So, for example, the general expenses that are included, okay, is your monthly payment of your autonomo. Okay. This is always going to be considered a tax deductible. Okay, another expense that is included and is always going to be considered tax deductible is the payment for your gestor or your accountant. Their professional services for dealing with your monthly accounts, they are always going to be accepted. Okay, also as well is any types of online subscriptions that you need to use on your day-to-day work. So, for example, you deal with marketing, for example, and you have to subcontract meta ads, or you need
Yeah.
to contract some type of CRM or software system, or a payment for Zoom, or any type of program that you use in your day to day for your work, that is considered tax deductible. Okay. Also, as well, what is considered tax deductible, okay, is partial amount to your rent, okay? And how is this calculated? And this is a very gray area. And in regards to this, because what it specifically mentions is that this is based on previous court cases that have already given some solid background to what is considered tax
Yeah.
deductible. Okay, so from, for example, your office space, they mentioned that you can deduct part of office space from your rent and part of your utilities. Okay, and the way this is calculated is based on the square meters that you designate for your office space. Okay, but this is where the gray area starts. Okay, and I always base myself on a generic rule. Okay, which is the 10% rule. Okay, and although I always mention that this is a generic rule, this is, in my experience, when dealing with tax audits, they, yet to date, I've gone through various tax inspectors and they've always to date accepted 10%. Okay. There is other cases where you can include up to more percentage, but it does then have to be provided with proof. Okay. How do we provide this proof? Okay, is they're going to calculate how much is this designated, or the amount of living square meters is that in your house. Okay, and then also as well, they're going to do this with a background check, because they're going to go onto the Cadastro website and they're going to check how many square meters for living purposes is in
Yeah.
your house. Okay, then they're going to go to the following section, is how many meters are you designating for your office space? Okay. And this will also depend and will have to make sense in how much you're designating for that specific area. Okay. So this is why I always go by the 10% rule, because supposing that an average or a sensible amount of square meters that is used, let's just say in a normal office or basis, or for an employee where you're working for a company, is probably going to be on average 6 to 7 square meters. Okay, and they use this as a legal background if you're including more space. Okay, they will say to you an average office space used by a worker is 6 to 7 square meters. So generically, for those households that are including in larger houses, 10% can also as well be more beneficial because 100 square meters in the home, 10% of that is 10 square meters. You're already above the average of the market, but also
Yeah.
is still going to be accepted for audited purposes.
So we always need to maintain to be conservative when it comes to the tax deductions.
Correct.
Because
Correct.
otherwise, it just opens a can of worms.
It does, yes. And in the moment that you see one, well, in Spain, in the moment that one auditor sees one specific problem or they have any type of benefit from that audit, is that they're going to provide audits for the following 4 consecutive years. Okay, so this is why it's very important to have this well audited, because if not, as you mentioned, it opens a can of worms and then you're going to have headaches for the following years. So it's
Yeah.
always best on this side to be conservative with that.
Yeah, and we will do a deep dive on the tax deductions because I feel like that's really important. But in
Hmm.
your case, because you have been working for years, you know,
Hmm.
you used to work at a very big, like tax agency company
Hmm.
and all that. So I want to know, based on your experience, what does a new person that just registered, especially like an immigrant or a
Hmm.
foreigner here in Spain, what is something that usually catch them off guard?
Okay. So probably what catches them most off guard is probably the first month's autónomo payment. Okay. As I mentioned at the start, that if we register in between the 1st and the 15th of the month, okay, the first payment due is on the last working day of that month.
Yeah.
Okay. But it becomes very common that lots of clients we end up registering in the second part of the month and they're expecting to pay that month. So then the following month they have to pay one plus two. Okay. Which that becomes very common. So now that is something that has happened to me quite often over the years. I already pre-advise the clients, right, okay, your registration date is the 20th. You're going to pay from the 20th until the 30th, okay? But that's going to be due next month, not this month.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And do you want to talk a little bit more about the flat rate on the Social Security, how that
Yes,
works, and how
correct.
far,
Yes,
and maybe more about Social Security with Cota Zero and, you know,
correct. Yes.
just Tarifa Plana and all that?
Okay, so for Tarifa Plana for the first year, you have a flat rate, okay? And this doesn't take into consideration any type of your situation when it comes to income, okay? After the first year is up, okay, then your income will change your autonomo payment, okay? So the way this works is that, for example, for the digital nomad community that needs to make a minimum of like 2.8, 2.9, okay, your minimum autonomous rate after the first year is going to start at like 350 onwards, okay, which is a considerable amount. Okay, so that is one very important factor to take into consideration. Therefore, I say mention 350 for the lower earners, but for the higher earners, for people earning, for example, more than 6,000 euros a month, after the first year, this goes up to like 600 euros a month. Okay. But also, as well, this is also considered a deductible expense. Okay. So therefore, it's included as an expense within your accounts and it lowers your tax. So you'll notice that the first year you pay a bit more tax. In the second year, it will come down, but because you're making more contributions into the Spanish system. Okay. Also, as well, after the first year, it's important to note that when you do that first year of Tarifa Plana, you will also have, depending on the community that you live in, you can have also as well a possible benefit, is what you mentioned earlier, which is called the Quota Cero. Okay. The Quota Cero, okay, is available in many communities. okay, throughout Spain. It's available in,
Definitely Andalusia.
yes,
Yeah.
it's in fact I've got a list here which we created. Okay, it is available in Andalucía, Madrid, okay, Cantabria, Aragón, Baleares, Castilla-La Mancha, and Extremadura, okay, or and Galicia. All of these communities, it's available at the moment. Okay. Previously, we have also seen these available in other communities. For example, as the Valencian region, um, it's available. It was available up to like a year ago. Then they eliminated it. Okay. Most recently, also, it was available in the Canary Islands and Murcia, but these communities have already publicly notified that new there will be new options to be able to request it again. So in the moment that they become open to request it, okay, you can request the quota cero if you meet the requirements. Okay,
Can you
the main
explain a little bit more what Quota Zero is and how does that work
Yes.
exactly?
Okay. So the quota cero is a concept that the government is going to pay out a grant. Okay. This grant is considered taxable on your annual income tax. Okay. And basically, they are refunding you the payment of your first year Social Security. Okay. In full. Okay. So what is important to know, okay, and the requirements according to the community can vary a tiny little bit, okay? They're not the same for Andalusia and Madrid as they are in other communities. So we would need to be assessed according to the community. But the generic, let's just say, concept is throughout all of the communities that you have been paying your Social Security throughout the year on time, okay, that you don't have any debts with the tax office, okay, or you don't have any debts with the Social Security, okay. And this is a generic requirement throughout any type of request of grants across Spain, or any types of requirements in regards to get any grant, is that you're going to have to be up to date with the tax and Social Security services.
Which is really fair, I feel, because
Hmm.
there are also grants for autonomo or like people that, are digital nomads, which
Hmm.
are very helpful just by
Yes,
starting
correct.
up, maybe scaling or accepting more
Hmm.
clients or making their business a little bit bigger. So, do you have any advice on these grants? Maybe how to find them, maybe if you
Yeah.
have ideas of grants that are really useful.
hmm Yeah, so for example, I do have a couple on the top of my mind that I'll just mention. Okay. Also, as well, all clients of Quintilis are also as well up to date with this. As I send out a
Yeah.
newsletter with the updates of all the grants that are available throughout the year, with each month with different requirements and and reminders. So they're always up to date with what is possible at that moment and time. Okay, but for example, off the top of my head, which currently at the moment isn't active, okay, because this is purely dependent on Europe, but I'm pretty sure that when Europe does create a new fund, there will be available to be requested again, okay, which is the Kit Digital, okay, and what this Kit Digital was in the previous grants was that the EU Commission pay you out directly. Okay, so you can improve from a digital perspective your business in Spain. Okay, so therefore you can implement it across all digital aspects of your company. Okay, this could mean that improving all types of CRM systems, softwares, help you with marketing, with SEO, and all these types of the section to help digitalize your business. Okay, and also as well, there is another section such as upgrading for example, even your laptop, for example,
Yeah.
improving that. But this at the moment isn't available. Okay, I'm pretty sure that within the next 3 to 6 months we'll see another publish from the EU Commission um, announcing them. But that is it's first come, first served basis. So therefore, whenever the funds are finished from the EU Commission, they have been finished. Okay, so
Yeah.
it's very important to be on top of it when they do become available. Okay, also as
Mm-hmm.
well across not only just these types of activities, but also across all other types of income um, across other types of companies and scale ups and startups. In each type of community, there is different types of grants available, and also as well local grants or grants within you live in towns that are less than 5,000 people. So it's
Yeah.
always very important to try and figure out um, within your specific region what is possible and what is available.
Yeah. I believe like up to last year,
Hmm.
Extremadura had a grant for digital nomads that moved there, that already have
Hmm.
been living in other parts of Spain and decided to move to Extremadura as a way to liven up, their economy as well. But
Yes.
with that being said, because I'm seeing this a lot on the comments, if someone
Hmm.
is married or has a partner, I don't know
Yep.
if that has a difference, like if they're
Yep.
not married, or maybe if they have minor kids or adult
Hmm.
kids, how does that change the picture with their taxes or their social security?
Okay, so in terms of taxes, okay, if your partner doesn't work, you have the possibility of including your partner as a dependent, okay, and present what is called a joint declaration. Okay, this joint declaration, what this does, it increases your minimum taxable threshold. Okay, so it adds an additional 3,000 euros onto your threshold. So therefore, it lowers your taxes as a family unit. So therefore, it can be very beneficial. Okay. In regards to Social Security, also as well, and it's an important point to also point out in regards to all of your dependents, okay, is that in the moment that you move to Spain and you're registered as an autónomo, you will have dependents for um, both your partner or even either your children, for example. And also, as well, I've seen the case where you have your parents. Okay. What is very important to know, and it happened to me recently with a case of a client, is your parents are not considered dependents from a social security perspective. Okay. So therefore, they cannot go onto the healthcare system. Okay. So it's very important that you assess the healthcare for your parents either through some type of certificate of coverage at source because they, for example, have pensionable age, for example, where I know it is a possibility with the Philippines, or if not, that they have to take out private healthcare here in Spain. That is a very important point. Okay. As from your, let's just say your couple and your children, okay, these can access the healthcare system, okay, but it's not automatic.
Yeah.
Okay, so from the moment that the main autonomo applicant is registered as an autonomo, in the following couple of days, they become active from the Social Security website. Okay, from that moment onwards, what is the process of adding your dependents? Okay, you have to submit a request to the Social Security. Okay, this can be done online. Okay, and here what you have to do is you have to provide your documentation of your dependents. Okay. In this case, what would you provide for your, let's just say, your partner? Okay. You would include, for example, the marriage certificate, okay, that has been previously translated to Spanish. And also, as well, you would submit a copy of their DNV approval within the system. With that, that is accepted to be added on as a dependent.
Can
Then,
also pareja
yeah,
de hecho, like partners, like unmarried partners, also be
well,
registered?
that is a question you have put me on the spot right now, Alex.
Just because someone's asking. But I remember another question that I wanted to ask about this is about adult children's as well. Like if they got approved and they're above 18 as
Mm-hmm.
a dependent under the DNV, do they
Mm-hmm.
also get covered by the social security of the main applicant?
Yes, they do, but up to the age of 25. Okay,
Because,
from that moment onwards, that is the cutoff date. Okay, if not, the only other way that you would have to provide proof is that in the event that once they go over the age of 25, is that they will have to provide some type of physical proof that they are fully dependent on the main person, okay, and that they have some type of disability. Okay,
oh,
so this is
okay.
very
So you're kind of like
specific.
a legal ward.
Exactly. If not, from that moment over the age of 25, legally you would lose the entitlement to that.
Yeah. So just as a recap, married, just traditionally legally married, your minor kids, your
Hmm.
adult kids up to the age of 25 is pretty straightforward.
Hmm.
However, if they reach over 25, that means there are some stipulations.
Correct,
And
yes.
then how about unmarried partners?
So, when you mentioned earlier pareja de hecho, if it's legally recognized in Spain, so therefore it has been previously translated and registered the document here in Spain, it can be legally added, but it has to be recognized in Spain. So therefore, what would have to be is, and also as well, sometimes in these cases, people get the pareja de hecho done here in Spain in front of a notary or a public authority, and then with that public document, then it would be valid. Okay, it would have to be
Bingo.
recognized in Spain in order to add um, as a beneficiary.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot more sense with regards to elder parents. Is
Hmm.
there a way to make sure, of course, these children that brought their parents here that are probably either elderly or close to that age want them to
Hmm.
be covered like healthcare wise. So what do you
Yes.
advise for them
So,
since they cannot be covered by the public health insurance since they cannot be added with the
mhm.
social security of the main applicant?
So with that case, realistically, they have various options. Okay. One of them, for example, is potentially get a Spanish job. You don't have no legal requirements. Let's just say, so you are free to work. Okay. And from the moment that you start working, and have a valid Spanish contract, for example, you are able to start receiving public health care. Okay. Another alternative and can be common if it can complement the main DNB holder, is potentially becoming and working for the main digital nomad um, as a collaborator. Okay, this is very specific to um, depending on the cases, but it can be included if it doesn't have any significant impact on the main holder. Okay, and also as well if that person is prepared to work for the main holder. Okay. If not, the other alternative to go on to the Spanish system would be to review one specific thing which I would like to review is Convenio Especial Seguridad Social España Filipinas. And I know this is available specifically to the communities of the Valencian region and Murcia, is that we have a system which is called Convenio Especial. Okay, so therefore you pay like a fixed rate of like 60 euros a month. Okay, and you can use the Spanish system. Okay, but it's only for residents for the Valencian region and Murcia.
Yeah. That
Okay,
makes a lot of sense. But also, a lot of people are asking, what does that mean to add a dependent in your social security? Does that mean you pay higher or are you still subjected to the tarifa plana?
so it doesn't change anything to the main holder. Okay, they continue to pay taxes as normal, and then your dependents have the access to the Spanish system of healthcare. So therefore, they do not have to pay anything extra as they are your dependents. Your taxes are not going to change, and your social security contributions are also not going to change.
Okay. And now going back to deductions and dependents, a
Hmm.
lot of questions here have this similar vibe of meaning if the main applicant has a minor child, or a main applicant is married, or a main applicant has an unmarried partner, that all
Hmm.
of them don't work. What does that mean for their taxes? And is there any tax deductions that can be added since they have
Yes.
dependents?
Well, in regards to all the dependents that you add on an annual income basis, okay, you would include um, those dependents which would increase your taxable threshold. So therefore, essentially, these are included once a year, and it lowers the amount of tax that you pay.
Yeah.
Also, is what I can see one of the comments most recently in the chat is about education, and that's also included.
Yeah, exactly. And how about just thinking about after the tarifa plana, or
Hmm.
after quota zero?
Hmm.
How do they compute the social security payments that you
Hmm.
pay monthly, right?
Yes,
Afterwards.
correct.
Is there like also percentage or progressive tax rate, or it
Right.
definitely depends on how much is your income per month?
Correct. Yes. In fact, we was going to explain that earlier, but we got sidetracked. I don't know how. But what is very important to know, from the section where I was explaining the expenses, we never finished exactly how your taxes are calculated. Okay, so the way your taxes are calculated is your income, okay, minus your expenses, okay, and then we reach an amount which is called your net income. Okay, your net income is what is going to be considered taxable. Okay, how do you pay this tax? Okay, so we have 4 quarters throughout the year. Okay, in fact, 4 days ago, we just finished the completion of quarter 1 of the quarter 1 filings. Okay, the next ones are due in July. Okay, and that's going to collect April, May, and June. Okay. And these taxes that you pay in July, okay, you're going to be prepaying tax throughout the year, okay, for your final annual income tax return. Okay. So throughout the year, you're going to be making 4 prepayments of personal income tax, okay, which is 20% of your net profit. Okay. And my suggestion and recommendation for all my clients is always set aside 20% of your revenue. Okay. Why is this important? Because that means then you can pay off your tax bill straight away when it comes to the tax quarter, and then you can forget about it. Okay.
Yeah.
And then also, as well, with the benefit of this, is by the time we've included your expenses afterwards, there is always going to be money left over because you're not taxed on the revenue, but you're taxed on the net profit. Okay. Also, as well, what can always be interesting is throughout the year is when you come on board as a client, we can always run a tax simulation. So then you know exactly globally how much you're going to pay. Okay. Because throughout the year, what we mentioned earlier, that the annual income tax system is progressive. Okay. But throughout the year, with the prepayments, we are paying a fixed rate of 20%. Okay, so when we file the annual income tax return, we can have to pay a higher amount of tax than what we have officially already prepaid, which is 20%. Okay, so when we present the annual income tax at the end of the year, okay, and let's just say your average tax rate has been pre-calculated at 25%, including all your family members after all your income and expenditures have been included, any incomes that you have worldwide or elsewhere outside of Spain, your average tax bracket rate has worked out at 25%. Okay. And throughout the year, you have been paying 20%. Okay. So once a year on your annual income tax return, that is when you will pay the difference, the remaining 5%. Okay. When you pay that remaining 5%, that is paid once a year. Okay. That can be split out and paid in different ways. It doesn't necessarily need to be paid in one amount. Okay. We have the possibility with the annual income tax to split it without any types of interest into two payments. Okay. Which is one is due on the 30th of June. Okay. Which you pay 60%. Okay. And then you pay the remaining 40% on the 5th of November.
Yeah, but this also in the annual income tax return can be balanced out by the annual expenses and the dependents coming into factor. So that's why it's very
Correct.
important
Yes.
to just
In
balance those books in the annual as well.
in yes, for example, also as well, what is possible? Let's just say a an individual here come in, let's just say to the Valencian region, which has two dependents, okay, and also as well has to pay for glasses and also has a gym subscription, okay. They prepaid tax throughout the year at 20%. They've earned, let's just say, an income of 40,000 euros. But then by the time we include the dependents and also as well the extra tax deductions, which we can include, okay, which originally their tax rate could have been 25%, we have managed to reduce this now to 19%. Okay, so if they've overpaid on their taxes throughout the year, they can ask for that refund for that difference.
That really, I feel, makes sense in also the context of making sure that it's not going to be that heavy for the annual income tax. So it's
Correct.
the
What
best
is,
advice to make
yes,
sure you're up to
im
date with your quarterly payments.
yes, important factor is for people who are higher earners, okay? Make sure that you set aside minimum the 20%, okay? If you have the possibility and you can estimate taxes, reach out to your advisor to give you a pre-simulation. It takes us literally 5 minutes to run a pre-simulation and give you an estimate of how much money you need to set aside annually.
Yeah,
Okay,
especially
so then
with,
you
I
don't
think,
have,
digital nomads. Because in a
yes,
sense, they have to maintain a certain
correct,
income requirement. They're either
exactly.
bounded by hours or by the days they work or a
Hmm.
monthly fixed rate. So it doesn't vary largely that it will change their percentage.
Exactly. Mainly from the perspective is that when you do present the annual income tax, that you don't get a massive surprise.
Exactly. Because that's, I think, what happens to the people that post online that get surprised with the big bill at the end of the year.
Yes, that is very common among people that who do earn higher incomes, and there's unfortunately it's something that you can't do nothing about, because you have the possibility to prepay 20%. That's the maximum that you can pay throughout the year. Okay, so therefore, if you are earning, let's just say 100 grand um, a year, okay, and then you do have to set additional money aside. And for example, from my perspective, what would I recommend? In the meanwhile, just put extra money set aside, put it in a savings account, generate a tiny little bit of interest in the meanwhile, okay, and then just have it ready to go for when it's due.
Yeah, that's perfect. And to just have a couple of frequently asked questions that also
Hmm.
came from our Facebook group.
Okay.
One of this here is, if I earn in USD or PHP from either a Philippine client or a US client and they file
Hmm.
their taxes in the Philippines, do I
Yeah.
still need to file in Spain?
It depend. Well, in Spain, you'll have to file for sure. Okay, either as a resident or as a non-resident. Okay, and then depending if you're a resident or a non-resident, we will need you to present or provide us the annual income tax return of the country wherever you're tax resident. So, for example, if you're a non-resident, we don't need it, but if you are a tax resident, we do need it.
Okay, that's perfect. How about the double taxation agreement between the Philippines and Spain? How does
Hmm.
that work? What documents do we need to provide our tax advisor or a tax accountant?
Okay. In fact, as we speak, I've just opened the treaty document because, as you can imagine, I have clients from all different types of countries,
I get it.
nationalities, tax residencies. Now, with the nomad visa, I'm getting very specific countries, and unfortunately, it's impossible to remember the conditions of all the countries as they change. They're more or less very similar across the board, but they do have some types of slight differences. Okay. With the general rule on how these double taxation treaties work, okay, and the main, let's just say, practice and idea behind of what a double taxation treaty is that when you are um, living in one country but working in another country, okay, that you're not taxed for the same amount of income twice. Okay. And the way this works is that if you are considered a tax resident of one country and you have paid tax in the other country, it means that this treaty puts in place so you can discount via a tax credit the amount of tax paid in that country. Okay. Then within the tax treaty itself, that's another world within, let's just say, the tax advice. Okay, because each type of income, depending on how it's categorized, is treated in one way or treated in another. Okay, and therefore also as well, depending on the type of income, on the treaties itself, it specifies which countries have the main taxing rights, in which countries can only tax it, depending on specific income. Okay. And in the event that both countries can tax it, okay, who taxes it first and where you apply your tax credits. Okay. So the idea behind these double taxation treaties is that you don't pay tax for the same concept twice.
Yeah. And I think also important part of it is that you have to also consider the immigration residency implications of
Correct.
making sure that you are compliant here in Spain, especially for people, especially Filipinos that are aiming to get citizenship, because that's really important. So, as much
Hmm.
as we want to go through loopholes and all that, I think it's very important that we stay compliant. And
Yes.
with that, if a Filipino digital nomad is moving
Yeah.
soon, what are the top things that they should do first in the Philippines to prepare themselves for coming here and registering and all that?
Okay, so for example, this is probably going to be a mixed answer from both me and you because from a tax perspective, for example, realistically, what I could add into that perspective is reach out to an accountant prior to moving to here. Okay. Let them assess your specific situation and your operations on what your ideas of when you want to move here. Okay. And what you have to do in order to get to Spain. Okay. And then, for example, a little tip that I mentioned earlier, if you need to sell your house in the Philippines prior to move here, it's better to move in the second part of the year, for example. So it's assessing that with a tax advisor, okay? And at the same time, also syncing it in with the immigration side at the same time. So everything works out with the guidelines, okay? Also, as well, pro tip before you're leaving the Philippines, make sure that when you leave the Philippines, you communicate to the tax authorities that you're leaving there.
Yeah.
Okay, that is probably one of the most important things, to inform them that you are moving to Spain, you're moving abroad, that no longer you're going to be paying taxes there.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Especially if you intend to not file anymore in the Philippines, I think it's important to make sure you close that account, because then you would be fined and you wouldn't even know. Because it's not like here in Spain where you get emails, or you get it in the
Mm-hmm.
hand shop
Yeah.
portal, or you get it in the mail if you like have not heard back from them or anything like that. So
Yeah.
in the Philippines, it just accumulates on there. And then the next time you're planning a new venture or maybe buying a house, you just discover that maybe your credit score has been damaged. So it's
Yes,
definitely
exactly.
important to do that. For me, I always tell people, in the face of the immigration authority and how they evaluate your papers when it comes to the financials part of it. It doesn't matter whether you have savings or not, because all they
Mm-hmm.
really look for is that, okay, you're meeting the minimum income requirement. Even
Yeah.
in the law, it says that. So if you do not have any use for the savings to make up for the minimum income requirement, it doesn't really
Mm-hmm.
matter. However, for you to sustainably live here, because you don't want to be here for a short time. You're paying your taxes, you're contributing to the social security. That means a long-term move. So as much as possible, save as much as you can. So you can stay here with a little bit of cushion with
Yeah.
regards to planning ahead, and also
Yeah.
if there are anything that goes awry.
Yeah. Especially from the perspective of being like very conservative. For example, a shock that many people receive here is when they arrive to Spain and try to get a long-term rental, that nowadays it's very common to have to put 2 months deposit down on a rent that is, let's just say, a thousand or 1,500 euros rent. So you're initially, from the first moment that you're doing that down payment, you're paying like 4,500 euros just up front alone, just to be able to secure a long-term rental here. So these types of things always help you, to make that, let's just say, that move more
Comfortable.
conservative and make you feel more comfortable as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because you don't want to be coming here, dealing with the paperwork, and then submitting it, dealing with all that anxiety and the
Hmm.
travel and the
Yeah.
effort, only to come up short,
Yeah,
you know?
that is very
So
much
I don't
true.
want it to be very stressful as well for applicants
Hmm.
to deal with that. But other than that, the only other advice is to switch to a more accessible and digital bank, because that's really important. You need to not only have that savings, but have access to that savings, because a
Hmm.
lot of the traditional banks in the Philippines make it hard to withdraw your money. I have a lot of clients that were able to find a good apartment, it was a good deal, they wanted to get it, and then they lose it because of the fund flow that they
Yeah.
have to like transfer from the traditional bank, and there's a cap limit on how much they can send, those type of things. I think it's really important to keep that also in mind, because you are, after all, immigrating to a whole new country which has
Yeah.
a whole different system. So as much as possible, if it's something of ease of access, that's really important. But there's another question here that I think you could answer. If
Hmm.
the dependent gets a job in Spain, so assuming this is like a normal physical job, does
Yeah.
she or he need to file her own taxes and social security?
Okay. So, in regards to that, if you're contracted for a Spanish company, the Spanish company will automatically deal with all of the social security side. Okay, that's covered within your Spanish payslip. Okay. And then in regards to the taxes, that's actually a good question because depending on how much money you earn, okay, you may or may not be obligated to present an annual income tax return. Okay. Right now, if you have one payer, let's just say you only have one job, okay, and you earn under 22,000 euros gross, okay, you currently don't have the obligation to file an annual income tax return, okay? That is because your employer previously has the obligation to retain the amount of tax for you. Okay, so your
Okay.
employer, as on your payslip, will pay on your behalf and retain from you the amounts for both Social Security and tax for you automatically. Okay, so then it simplifies your process. Okay, in the event that you are obliged to present an annual income tax return, okay, you would have to file it on an annual basis, okay, and that's filed once a year in between April and June.
Yeah, and with this one, how does it affect the main applicant? Because they maybe have been jointly filing before, or they were
Mhm.
under the main applicant's social security. So how does that really work?
So in this case, the joint declaration is interesting when one person works and one person doesn't. Okay. Where it stops becoming interesting is when both of you work. Okay. And the way this works is that when you file a joint declaration, both of the incomes from both of the people are put together. Okay. So therefore, what it does is that you get an additional threshold of 3,000 euros. Okay. But the moment you add the two incomes together, it's more than the 3,000 euros. So therefore, it becomes more interesting to actually present individual tax returns. Okay. And then, for example, if you was to have, let's just say, kids, okay, and you're both the parents, that is included in proportional amounts to both of the parents. They're put on there. You have to identify who the kids are, who you're married to, and it automatically separates them in between the two private individuals.
Oh, that's really interesting. I would have thought they would just pick one. You can only pick either this one or this one to
No,
get the
no,
tax deduction.
no.
Yeah, but that's
In
really
fact,
good.
an interesting point about that is the way it's regulated, it's based on household. Okay. So for example, um, if for example, let's just say I have a child with my girlfriend, okay, we are both including the deductible amount, although we are not married, okay, because we have a child in common and we live in the same home. Okay, and that's the way it's regulated.
Oh, so in a sense, if you guys don't live together, then the
Yes,
other
that's
parent that lives with the child gets kind of like the tax credit for it.
correct.
Okay.
Correct.
That really makes a lot of sense. And I think you really opened up a lot of people's mind because I always see a lot of questions about taxes that basically makes people pause their
Hmm.
applications or makes them rethink about moving here in
Yeah.
Spain. And I think this is not just the digital nomad visa, but also all types of visa. Spain
Yeah.
gets a bad rep with its tax regime and all that. But if you really think about it, especially what I tell people is the quality of life here, you can really see the payoff. You know, like
Yeah.
the
That
taxes
was a
go somewhere.
specific topic that I had yesterday, speaking at the Alicante Nomad Summit event, that people mentioned in regards to how difficult Spain can be, that it does have a lot of bureaucracy and it can be quite heavy both on social security and taxes. Okay, that's something that if you're willing to move to Spain, that's something that you have to understand that Spain is gradually improving it quite a lot since when I started working to what they are achieving and improving with right now. We've had very good changes. Okay, they are making processes a lot easier. Okay, and they are benefiting with extra discounts, for example, like the kit digital, the guardacero. They're improving certain things of this, and also as well, I imagine they will carry on to improve it because the autónomos in Spain are the backbone of the country at the moment. There is like 3.5 million autónomos registered, so they are genuinely the backbone of the country, of all the businesses running and dependent on the country. So I do think they will gradually improve it. Okay. But then from a personal perspective, is the lifestyle here is absolutely amazing. And the example that I always set is because I have British nationality and my family members are in the UK, and everyone asks me, do you ever go back to the UK as a holiday? And I'm like, holiday? No. In this case, what I always mention to them is my family prefers to come to Spain to visit because the lifestyle and just everything in Spain is genuinely incredible. You have the best weather, the climate, the lifestyle, going out, places to eat, culture, everything in general is what Spain has to offer. It just goes to show how many people are coming and to Spain just because of the lifestyle that you can get.
Yeah,
And the numbers
exactly.
speak for it themselves.
Yeah, and if for me, coming from a third world country, I was very comfortable there with making, the minimum income requirement for the digital nomad visa. But what I always tell people is that
Hmm.
you also want to move to a place that your taxes are going somewhere, you can feel it, and the healthcare here, I mean, so far with my experience, has
Hmm.
been very much a different experience than where I came from. But thank you so much, Josh. And I have a few more questions, which is basically how can they contact you? Because a lot of people are
Okay.
interested. You see it a lot in the messages, and I'm getting also messages personally. So I wanted to make sure you get also your time in the spotlight to
Hmm.
people also know more about you and your company.
Okay. So within the scan code below, okay, that takes you to a link, okay, and within this link itself, you have a breakdown of all of the different links to all my social medias and also my website and calendar to book directly a consultation with me, okay. You can either reach out to me directly, and Alex, with the post, I'm not too sure if we can add within the chat, like my email or my telephone number,
Yeah, I could do
so they
that.
can reach out to me directly. I'm available both on WhatsApp and through email. Okay. Or if not, if you would like to leave a consultation query directly through the website, you can reach out to me also through there. Okay. I would recommend scanning the QR code that Alex has prepared for today's talk because that takes you directly to my calendar if you need to check in with a call.
Yeah. And definitely tell us when is the best like time to reach out with you to have the consultation, because every person has a different preference. Like I always advise people
Yes.
that I want them to move here with the knowledge of what it is to live here. So I want them to contact you the moment they decide, okay, I want to move to Spain.
Hmm.
So I want them to have that reality. But
Yes.
for you, maybe it would have been different.
From my perspective, is probably a bit. I'm considering moving to Spain, okay, and I want to check if the taxes are right for me and everything suits him well. That could be a good opening to have a very short, brief call to understand their situation and then get any pro tip of when they want to schedule in the guidelines. Okay. Then closer to the date, if the answer is yes and they do want to move to Spain full time, that's when I would say to you, right, okay, let's set up a call in the process of when you're actually doing it. Okay, when we have a clear date of when you want to move to Spain, that moment onwards, that's when we start to synchronize both the legal side and the immigration side with the taxation structure side at the same time.
Yeah, That is definitely what I would advise to. Because I don't want people to come here, get approved, and then get surprised. Oh, I have to register. I thought this and that. Because everyone has a different, like,
Approach on
advice.
it.
Yeah, and
Yes.
an approach on it. But for me, I always go the conservative route. You
Yes.
know?
In fact, Alex, that advice itself for me is wonderful. And that is the advice that I think they should be given across all of the sector, of that transparency, of giving the clients the real right advice, in order to not just close sales from your perspective,
Yeah.
but truly to be transparent with the advice that you're giving. Because in the long term, it avoids me um, many headaches, and let's just say avoid giving the bad news, because at times I always like to use this reference. I feel like I'm the Grinch at Christmas that have given the bad news to the client because they've had a shock, for example. But it is a true reality that later on they arrive to me and then I tell them all these things and they're like, I wish we knew all this beforehand.
Yeah.
So it is definitely very important to assess
And
everything beforehand.
it also is not good to, because a lot of people like, and like me, I sour graped the move to Spain all
Hmm.
throughout the application purpose, like process. So
Hmm.
I was like, oh, I'm not gonna get approved. Who knows if I'm actually gonna move there and stuff like that. And then when
Hmm.
I actually got approved, it happened all so fast. So I always tell
Yeah.
people slow and steady. As much as possible, learn if you actually want to live here, because even the application cost itself is a lot. So what more about moving here? So I don't want, like, people saying, ouch, I didn't know about this. But definitely thank you so much, Josh.
Okay.
And I've dropped his WhatsApp down there in the chat, but definitely if you want for me to introduce you to Josh via email, I could also do that as well. But he is very reachable. We have the same kind of concept with
Yeah.
running our businesses. We want to be
Correct.
as approachable and as reachable as much as we can, because
Hmm.
we want people to come in, get onboarded with having the knowledge that they kind of chose us. Like they know what they're expecting working with us. Is Josh based in Alicante
Yes.
as well? Yeah. So we are all now based in Alicante, which has a very big digital nomad community.
Yeah. I think it will be number one day.
Yeah, almost. We've had a meetup actually with just Filipino digital nomads, and these are just people that are my clients, have met me on TikTok or found me on TikTok. And I just
Hmm.
invited them, like, oh, you guys don't have a group chat here of like digital nomad Filipinos
Yeah.
here. And we just created something out of the blue. And there were already like almost gonna be like 30 people in the group, which is a
Wow, that is
lot.
great.
For someone that's just like, oh, this one and this one. So we know that there is a bigger community out there.
Yes, there definitely is.
Yeah,
I
thank you
seen it in
so
first
much,
hand
Josh.
yesterday as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm glad I've missed. I'm not glad I've missed it. I'm sad to have missed it, but definitely there is always a next time. I mean, you've been
Of
excellent
course.
here. You're an excellent speaker. You've explained it like way better. Like I wouldn't have explained
Thank
even
you for the
half of what
kind
you just
words.
said. Yeah, but thank you so much, Josh, and
Okay.
thank you so much everyone
It
for
was a
watching
pleasure to
this
be
week's
here.
live. I'm gonna post this on YouTube every Mondays, and
Okay.
hopefully you guys would be able to reach out with Josh. Um, in case you have any follow-up questions, especially with your personal and specific situation. And thank you so much, Josh, again. And glad to have you here. And we hope to have you here again.
Of
And
course.
yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I'm just running out of English now. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Ciao. And then this comes the part where I don't know how to end the live.